Hey guys, Chris from Drift Outfitters here, and I'm really excited today because I'm going to show you how to tie the Clouser Minnow. This has got to be one of the most famous and popular flies, certainly the last number of years, and wasn't designed too far away from home. This is a fly that was designed, of course, by Bob Clouser. And I believe it was designed, if I remember right, on the Susquehanna River as a bass fly that he would use when he was guiding. Now, it's probably become better known in the years since as more of a saltwater pattern, certainly very popular for a whole range of species down south for flat fishing and otherwise, but great bass fly. Works for steelhead pretty well, and also a really underrated trout fly. This is one of the most popular go-to streamers out west on the Bow River for rainbows and browns, and definitely works here at home as well, just as a nice small sort of fry pattern, really easy to cast, and sinks really well too, which is always a great plus, and a really just flat out easy tie. Really, you can pump these things out, minimal materials, and they get the job done. So this is a really cool fly here, actually. This is actually tied by Bob himself. I got this fly from him when I was, I got to see him tie a bit down in New Jersey. But yeah, we'll see if we can do it justice here and tie our own up. So hook that I'm going to use, this is a Daiichi 2546. It's a saltwater hook. Don't have to use a saltwater hook, but what you're really looking for, something with sort of an O'Shaughnessy bend, and a little bit of a long shank, or at the very least a standard shank, nothing too short, and with a straight eye, ideally. Those are sort of the points you're looking for, but bottom line, just about any streamer hook will do the job. For thread, I'm going to tie a brighter one here today. This is some 8/0 Veevus in fluorescent yellow chartreuse, and I'm just going to start the thread up at the eye, and I'm going to take wraps back, not going all the way down the bend. I'm going to stop just past the midpoint here. Maybe take a couple more wraps back than that and around there. I'm going to bring my thread forward just slightly, doing around about a third of the way back from the eye, going back to the bend of the hook here and around there. And we're going to start this fly by tying in a pair of Dumbell eyes. So you can use brass, lead, even use bead chain if you want a lighter one here, but we're going to go with the classic lead Dumbell. This is a small and just a silver color. And I'm just going to secure these a little ways back from the eye, just because we have a fair bit of material that we want to tie in front of them, and we don't want to crowd ourselves here. We want to leave lots of working room, really give us a nice, easy platform to work with. So if you haven't seen our video or you haven't worked with Dumbell eyes before, I'll quickly go over it here, but we do give a more in-depth sort of explanation on how to secure these things effectively. You can definitely go back and reference here. But all I'm going to do, I've made a couple just cross wraps over the top, and now I'm going to wrap around the side. Whoops, that's a little too loose. Get a couple more wraps on here. There we go. So I'm going to go around the side of the Dumbell, back, around the other side and back, and you can see how that's sort of torquing them one way and then the other. We're going to keep repeating that process in a somewhat kind of random fashion, just getting wraps, pulling in all different directions on these eyes until they really lock up for us. I'm going to go a little more quickly here. It's basically the same process, just repeated over and over until they're nice and solid for us. And what you can do as well, you can grab a little super glue, just put a little dab, oops, there we go, just behind those eyes. That'll really secure them there for us. I find on this fly in particular, the way that the materials are tied in around the eyes does actually help anchor them as well. So those are pretty solid, those aren't moving around on us. What we're going to do to start this fly is take a little bucktail. And what you'll see is usually in this fly it's tied in sort of a two-tone color scheme, usually a light and dark color. And this fly does invert, so you'll see it rides hook point up. So what you have to remember is that whatever color you tie on top of the fly to start here is going to be the bottom color for the fly. So in this case, as I say, I'm going to tie a brighter color scheme of white and chartreuse, one of my favorites and one real staple color scheme in this pattern. And so I'm going to tie in the white to start with, because that's going to be my belly color. Now when you're taking your hair, you want to focus on hair from in around the midsection of this tail up toward the tip. You want to avoid the stuff right down at the bottom, because this is very hollow hair and it tends to flare quite a bit. It doesn't move as well. The stuff at the tip here is less hollow, doesn't flare as much, and is a little softer in the water. So I'm going to take just a small clump of hair from up close to the tip here, snip it off of the tail like so, and I like to make these tips just not squarely stacked, but a little denser than they are. I find that if I tie it in like so, it ends up being a little sparser than I want in the final product. So what I'm going to do, this clump isn't actually too bad, but I'm just going to grab the hair at the base, and I'm just going to grab the very tips of this hair. I'm going to pull them out like so, and then I'm going to stack them back in. If there's one or two real long ones, I'll just pluck them out entirely. But now I've got a slightly more square clump of hair here. As I say, this one wasn't actually bad to begin with, so it's not much of a change. You might see it more on the chartreuse when I do that one. Tail on this is somewhat up to you. I've seen these tied really long. I've seen them tied much shorter. I go for about 1.5 to 2 times the hook shank here, hanging off of the bend of the hook. So just sort of eyeball that. That's where I like it, is back in around here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grasp these fibers once they're measured out just behind the eyes. And I'm going to catch them in with my thread. I'm going to make a few wraps here, sort of pulling up on the tail hair here, just to keep it right on top of the shank, like so. Take a couple more wraps back and then forward. And you'll see what I'm not doing here is I'm not wrapping all the way back down to the bend. That's a big mistake that you see a lot of people make with this fly. If you look at Bob's, just to prove the point, it's only tied down about halfway down the shank. The reason for this is that if you leave these fibers exposed and intact, they'll have a lot more motion for you, and they'll give the fly a little bit more body. Now you'll see even on a lot of commercially tied ones, they wrap over this hair and tie it right down. And that looks really good on the vise, admittedly, but it limits the motion that the fly has. So what I'd recommend, leave that as is. Just tie these down behind the eyes. You don't want to tie this down in front because then they'll kick right up, but just tie them down behind, and then we're going to bring our thread in front of the eyes and pull down these butt ends over the top of those eyes like so, and tie them down nice and tight right in front. Pull those in nice and snug. And then really lock those in like so. And this is what I mean by, the materials sort of further securing these dumbbells by having those there. I find that does stabilize those eyes a little further. Now what I'm going to do with the butt ends, I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to cut them off at a little bit of an angle. That'll make it easier just to keep a nice, fairly tight head. Like so. And now I'm going to flip this vise over. If you don't have a rotary vise, you can just flip the hook over in the jaws of your vise. Take the hook out and put it back in, that is. But the rotary function is a huge plus for these flies. In the middle of this, we're going to sandwich some flash. Now this is a Krystal Flash. This is the standard sort of material that you use for this fly. But you could absolutely use a Flashaboo. If you look, there is a great fly. It's very similar to a Clouser called a Krystal Minnow, tied in the same sort of way overall, but the whole fly instead of bucktail uses. It's a Krystal Flash. It's very similar to a polar flash or something like that. And so it's just all flash everywhere. So you could go really heavy on the flash. You could use different materials, whatever you like. I've got 3 strands. I find that's a nice sort of amount for this fly. And all I'm going to do is double them over my thread here, making sure I have plenty of length on either side. And then I'm just going to tie it down at the nose and wrap back over it, keeping these right on top of the fly. Like so. And I'm just going to brush them back into the tail like so, and I'm going to trim them so they're about the same length as that bucktail. I don't worry too much about tapering these. There aren't many fibers. I don't mind them being square with the tail. I don't think it affects the taper much. So that's our flash. And then we're going to tie in the top colors. So as I mentioned, I'm going to use some chartreuse in this case. Could do this fly in 100 different ways with just a white belly and different colors on top. So feel free to mix that up. The chartreuse is a great one, especially for bass. This is more of a bass color for me. I haven't really fished this much for trout, although I'm sure it would work. For trout, my go-to is more of the olives, things like that. So here you can see what I mean about the tips. You know, they're quite sparse at the very ends here. What I like to do, again, I'll pull out some of those real short ones, but then I'm going to pull out, if I can show you this, the longest fibers. And I'm going to bring them back into the mix here and just sort of realign them. If there are a couple real long ones, I'll just pluck them out. You can see I've got, you know, slightly more aligned tips now. It's got a little more body to it. It's not a square edge like you would get out of a hair stacker though. It's got a little taper to it still, which is nice, but it's just got more body. That's what I like to do. You could leave that as a natural edge too, that'd be fine. Now I'm just gonna push these back. They sort of find their own way around the hook there. And I'm going to align them more or less with that white at the back here. And you can trim these beforehand if you like. That does make it a little easier, although not absolutely necessary. And I'm just going to push those down against the hook, catch them in. Make sure they're still aligned. It looks like they are. And then I'm going to wrap back until I get back to the eyes. And back forward, just covering up those tag ends, or the butt ends. Make sure it's flat over the top. And you could finish the fly just like that. That would be a great fly in its own right. But one other thing you can do if you want to sort of accentuate this light and dark blend here they have going is you could take some Peacock herl and just strip off a few fibers, or just pull them out of the bag if you don't have an eye intact like this. I've got 4 fibers here. I'm just going to align the tips of them more or less. And I'm just going to place those over the top of this fly as well. Measuring them again out to be about the length of the total fly. And again, just catch them in right on top. And that just gives you a nice kind of dark back. You know, if you look at most minnows, they do have a darker back than their sides or belly to help camouflage with their surroundings. So I think that's a great little trigger point that you can add to your fly if you like. And then I'm just going to throw on a quick whip finish here, like so. And the one last thing I like to do on these flies, you know, you can just head cement this head and that's fine. But what I do find is you do have, you know, these strands of bucktail over the eyes, which are kind of vulnerable to fish's teeth, and they kind of get mangled sometimes. So what I like to do, this is just some thin Solarez here. I just do a quick once over on this whole head, including over those bucktail fibers, and that just really improves the durability of this fly. You can even go very carefully slightly over these back thread wraps, just careful not to get glue all over the hair. Just go lightly over top of those thread wraps. And once you do this, this is just a bulletproof fly at this point. It's got no weaknesses really. I mean, everything's glued in here. Bucktail in its own right is a very, very durable fiber, which is great. You can catch just loads of flies on the, or loads of fish rather, on these flies, and they really do take a beating very nicely. That is your Clouser Minnow. Give it a go.